Greetings and durud. Welcome to our fourth edition of the inaugural season of Farhang Literature, Farhang Foundation's new book club. I am Ali Reza Ardekani, CEO of Farhang Foundation, and we are delighted to have you join us for today's conversation about our latest critically acclaimed book selection. Today, we are honored to welcome acclaimed author Porochista Khakpour to discuss her delightful novel, Tehrangeles. The book has been heralded as the best book of the year by the likes of Vogue, Harper's Bazaar, W, and Vanity Fair, just to name a few. Author Kevin Kwan calls the book delightfully twisted and heartfelt, and Marjan Kamali says Tarangeles is funny, devastating, and filled with dazzling, accurate observations about the absurdities of our age. Porochista Khakpour is an award-winning Iranian-American author of the novels Suns and Other Flammable Objects and The Last Illusion, as well as the memoir Sick and the essay collection Brown Album. Her writing has appeared in the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, the Washington Post, Book Forum, Elle, Slate, and many more. Among her many fellowships is the National Endowment for the Arts Award. She has taught at Columbia, Johns Hopkins, and many more. She was born in Tehran, raised in LA, and currently lives in Harlem, where she's joining us today from. Joining Porochista in conversation today is none other than our incredible host, award-winning author, screenwriter, and producer, Abdi Nazemian. Abdi is the author of numerous novels, including Like a Love Story, a Stonewall Honor book, The Chandler Legacies, The Walk-in Closet, Only This Beautiful Moment, winner of the 2024 Stonewall Award from the American Library Association, and Desert Echoes. His latest novel, Exquisite Things, was released earlier this fall by HarperCollins and has received rave reviews. So we highly recommend you check it out. Abdi's screening credits include films such as The Artist's Wife and The Quiet. He has served as producer on numerous films, including Call Me by Your Name and Little Woods. Today's talk will commence with a one-on-one conversation between Abdi and Porochista, and later Abdi will host a book club talk with you, the audience members, who wish to participate on screen in our discussion. Now, without further ado, please join me in welcoming these two incredible authors to Farhang Literature. Welcome, Abdi Jan. Welcome, Porochista.
Salam. Hi, I am back to host the fourth book club. It's such an honor. Truly, these sessions have been so meaningful for me because it really creates community through art, which I think our community needs right now. Just for everybody listening, I'm going to do my best to throw your questions into the interview portion. So if you have any questions you want me to ask before we discuss as a book club, put them in the Q&A, and I will do my best to get to all of them. I want to let you know that this book is a book I love so deeply. I read it before it came out and I read it again. And one of the things that was so fascinating to me about it is how topical it was when it first came out, how quickly, Porochista, you put in what we were going through as a society into the book, and how fascinating it was to revisit it 5 years later with some time behind us and to think about the themes you're dealing with. It's a book that feels fun and humorous, but is so deep. And like all the best satires, it's full of love for its characters. And I think that's something I just want to say. There's so much love in these pages, and that's what great satire is. So thank you. Before we begin, could you just tell us a little bit about your journey as an Iranian-American writer, your relationship to Iran and to your identity?
Yeah, it sort of being a writer sort of chose me. I mean, I had come to the US and I was quickly in ESL. We had come at the beginning of the Iran-Iraq War, and I was from a family of not right. There were no writers really. So
Mhm.
like this wasn't a natural move. It was most I would come from a long line of math and science people. And so when we came to the US and I was put in all these ESL classes, and this was also a pretty painful time to come to the US as an Iranian. There was a lot of
Yeah,
anti-Iranian sentiment. It was only a handful of years after the hostage crisis and all that. So I was just like, you know, language was the thing that was felt the furthest from me. It also was like what I was being teased about the most. And so part of me was like, oh, one day I'm gonna get good at this like language. And these people that are harassing me, they're gonna have to like hear me. But I wasn't really sure how it would come about. And then it was like when I was in second grade, I had a teacher that kind of could tell I had a sort of storytelling talent. And then it turned out some of that had come from our refugee experience. You know, when I didn't really have toys like normal kids, or I didn't have like play dates or anything. It was just me and my parents and me like, you know, having very limited resources. So like paper and pens, I would tell stories to just fill up the time, or occasionally my parents could buy me a book, you know, because again, it's not a lot to carry, you know. So storytelling became something I was interested in, but I didn't really think you'd have a career from that because I didn't have a model for that. And
sure.
so then, you know, when my second grade teacher was like, you know, you're good at writing, I was like, oh, what's that? You know, and I just sort of was like, okay, I want to be an author. I had started kind of saying that when I was around four, actually during the refugee time, but I didn't, again, know what it was like. And she actually had me like send poems and stories to like highlights for children. So I was already like experiencing like rejections in second grade, you know, and then trying to like on my off hours, like write novels in elementary school. So I got really into it and just like it never occurred to me to not believe in myself because there wasn't really a road for me. You know, when you're like a refugee child, you're already like, are we staying here? You know, is this like
Mm.
there's so many uncertainties. So maybe that was actually part of what let me take that leap into being an artist. And then, I mean, there's like diary entries of mine and even drawings that where I say like, one day I'm going to be an author. I'm going to live in New York City. I'm going to write my first book before I'm 30. My first novel came out a few months before I turned 30. You know,
Wow.
I'm going to write for the New York Times, which ended up being a publication I wrote for a lot. You know, all these things like I envisioned as a kid, some of them really happened. So yeah, by the time like I went to the public school system in LA, and I went to a school that had creative writing, which wasn't that common in the mid 90s, and I got a scholarship there, and then suddenly I was on the track to just do this.
It's absolutely incredible. There's so much about that I love. And I also love when a teacher has a huge impact on the life of a writer because I felt I had the same.
Oh wow. Yeah.
Teachers are so, so important. I mean, I'm also curious because you mentioned you wrote your first book, I think it was 2007, right, that it came out. So I'm
Yes.
curious, like for you, before we delve more deeply into Tarangeles and its text, how you feel the experience of being an Iranian-American author has changed in terms of the reception your stories get, and also what the difference is between writing for Western readers and Iranian readers in the diaspora, like the people who many of whom are here in this space.
Yeah. So 2007, right before the book came out, that was like right around, or no, it was right around my pub date was when Ahmadinejad had come to New York to give that notorious talk
Oh,
about at Columbia, I think it was, you know, the talk where he talks about like there's no gay people in Iran
no
and
gays
stuff.
in Iran. We don't have
Yeah.
this phenomenon in your country. I know it by heart.
Yeah, it just became this huge headline and it sort of you know, there's a lot of attention on a lot of his all sorts of toxic beliefs he had. He suddenly became even more of a household name. And so I already like when that happened, I was like, oh my God, like my whole life is always going to be tied to like the news. Like Iran is always in the news for some reason we don't want usually. And so like instantly that first book of mine was yeah, it's a father-son story about Iranians and Iranian Americans, but it was immediately tied to like irrelevant things in the news cycle. And that kind of just kept happening with every book. And so that was like when I shortly after that, about a year after that, I became an essayist. And even my journalism work that I'd been already engaged in for years became more and more Iran centered. So I sort of became increasingly thrust into the role of being like sort of cultural spokesperson for Iranians, which I was really uncomfortable with. Because again, I always wanted to emphasize to people like Iran is such a big country. Iranians are so different. There's so much,
Mm.
don't do this thing where you take one Iranian and you assume that's like the whole story. So there was a lot of that.
Yeah.
And um and what was the second part of your question? I
Well,
forget
the
that.
second part of my question, I'm
Oh,
always really interested in it because I talk to so many Iranian authors about this and people have different perspectives, is the difference between your writing being received by
yeah,
Westerners and by us, by your own community within the
yeah, yeah,
diaspora.
yeah.
How is that
It's
relation?
funny. Yeah, yeah, the most comfortable audiences for me actually usually were Iranians in Iran, so non-diaspora Iranians and Westerners. It was actually Iranian Americans, our people, that I sometimes struggled with the most because I felt I possibly again it's because of the type of representation of Iranian Americans. It's always such a narrow representation that like excludes so many of us. And so I just always felt like I didn't fit in with even with the little bits of representation there were, I didn't really see myself among these people, even though I was sort of forced to be clumped with them. And I sometimes saw them as like antagonizing to me, because my family didn't really have money and we weren't part of this like Tarangeles set that I ended up writing about. We were very much other to that world. So I struggled a lot with that. And early on in my writing career, or even before when I was just a journalist, like I had an audience in Iran. A lot of Iranians in Iran always like kind of liked me and they kind of understood me in a way. And they were always like looking for Iranians in the diaspora to like communicate with. So
Mhm.
I had a sort of interesting audience there that I continue to have that's very different than the Iranian Americans. And then the Westerners were interesting because like again, like I'm not for everyone, but the Westerners that really got me, and they tended to be on the East Coast more. So New York became increasingly a home in a way that LA didn't. And I think that's also my problem sometimes with the Iranian diaspora. It's not the Iranians so much, but it's the LA influence. Always a little uncomfortable for me. Again, because I was from the east side of LA, I didn't grow up in this image of LA that people had. So I felt very like invisible and that like it was going to be a struggle to like,
No,
survive.
do you feel like that's changed? I mean, obviously you wrote a whole book about LA Iranians, and I know this LA Iranian loves it.
Yeah.
Well, I'm certainly not the characters you write about, but do you feel like that relationship has changed?
Yeah, I think LA has changed. LA's really evolved and it's become a city I like a lot more now. Like you'll remember this. Like there was a period in like the 80s and 90s in LA, like it just felt like the perception of LA was just like bottle blondes and like surfers and like this kind of like I mean it's kind of campy, this cool bimbo aesthetic and stuff, but it was very hard if you're like a nerdy brown kid, growing up in like the valley that no one even cares about, and you're like, I don't see myself in this at all. Like we're so far from the beach. Like people are always thinking about the beach, but we have to drive like 45 minutes an hour to get to water. And so I just like didn't really get it. And now LA is a city with amazing bookstores. Its diversity is more and more talked about than ever. It's just there's so much going on. Culturally, it feels richer than ever. So yeah, I feel like I've grown into LA way more, and LA has evolved in a way that I really love, and I feel
Mhm.
really proud of it now. But yeah, there was still a period, like even in my 20s when I was working on the first novel, like I was a shop girl on Rodeo Drive, and it was like felt really humiliating to be on like the other side of the LA discussion, the invisible LA, it felt like. Yeah.
No,
It's
that's really interesting. And I think that is true. I've lived in LA since 1998 and I've watched it change so
yeah.
much. And I will say, and this book club is a prime example in everything Farhang does, the Iranian community here has changed so much.
Yes. Oh my God. Yeah. I mean,
So
it's the
much.
opposite of most cities. Most cities get worse. New York is getting worse every
Yeah.
day, but
Yeah.
LA seems to get better and better.
Yeah.
It's unique.
Absolutely. So this wasn't going to be my first question about the book, but I feel like it's a perfect segue. The character of Mina and her online life really fascinated me when I was rereading it. And the reason is because she wants to enter these fan communities because she wants a sense of belonging. And you say, I mean, specifically, you say she did like the music, but more than that, she loved the fellowship of the fans. It was a global collective of all ages, from teens to senior citizens. And as someone who similarly sought, these kinds of communities when I was young. The question that came up for me is, why do you think kids like Mina or myself, or perhaps you, don't find that in our own cultural community? Why are young Iranians seeking belonging outside of?
Yeah, it's so interesting. So with Mina specifically, and Mina's really the character I relate to the most. Like she had this real obsession with K-pop. That was
Yeah,
kind of her like world and queer communities within like the K-pop world and all that. And I just even remember as a child too being really driven to anything that was kind of like outsider, whether it was like punk or like even certain types of like West Coast hip hop or whatever it was that was sort of outsider, even just being an artist felt like kind of outsider. Those things really appealed to me, whereas it felt like a lot of Iranians around me, including my like cousins and things like that, they were really drawn to like assimilating to like the mainstream culture. And I just felt like I didn't have a chance. Like that, like there is no way I could pull off like trying to fit in with mainstream culture. So I just never really like I remember my best friend and I in elementary school very consciously deciding that we were not going to be one of the popular kids. Like we weren't going to even try for it because we knew we didn't have a chance. We're not going to compete with these girls. Like we were just going to have our own world and be outsiders and weird and uncool and we're going to have fun with that. And that's just kind of been a theme in my life. I've never felt like I'm the best at anything. I just feel like I'm going to be happy in my corner. I just want to like be like kind of off the radar and just allowed to do what I want to do without people like without scrutiny. Because I've realized a life in the shadows, a life outside of scrutiny is a really fulfilling life.
yeah,
You get to like the like I always thought my parents like I always liked them paying attention to my little brother because the more they pay attention to him, it was like the opposite of most kids. Like I didn't want attention because I knew with when you don't get attention, you get this privacy in your own world and you can just get lost in stuff. And I'm never bored. As a
yeah.
creative person, I always had some worlds. So I kind of just loved outsider cultures. And I was sort of surprised that other Iranians didn't really want that. Again, it's the era, like 80s, and there's tons of Iranians now that are punky and weird and all that stuff, but there wasn't a ton of that representation. I guess because we were all kind of hiding maybe and just trying to survive the
For sure.
mainstream.
For sure. I was just telling my kids this, that I was quite bullied and hazed in the beginning of my high school experience. And then I did this summer program at Oxford where I studied cinema and bought all
Oh,
these vintage clothes in London and came back like this total bohemian who owned my weird artist
yeah.
self. And that's when everyone started liking me. And
Right.
so what I would offer to you is you actually are the best at something, which is the best at being yourself. You're a unique
Right.
person. Growing up Iranian, I think when we first probably came, there was a pressure to assimilate, to
Yeah.
be like everyone else, to not stand out. And I think what's beautiful now is we're seeing the people who do stand out in our community
Yes.
and celebrating them.
Absolutely.
Which also I feel like a theme in the book that we have to talk about, and I have a few questions about this, is the kind of obscuring of Iranian ethnicity that happens throughout the book. So obviously the most dramatic example is Roxana pretending to be Italian, which is
Right.
so funny. Banafsheh going by Violet, Al, the father, pretty much only speaking English. At one point, you write, "What is more Persian than dyeing your hair blonde? Persian is not natural, baby." And that's what I say to you. What is more Persian than Americanizing your name? And
Yeah.
I'm curious, like, do you think that's just part of the immigrant experience in general, or is there something specific about our diaspora that makes us gravitate to this illusion that we can go blonde, change our name, and be Western?
Well, it's done in a very different way. I mean, on one hand, we have like this privilege of passing, right? So, like most Iranians, like the Italian thing that I did it because it's kind of a known trope, right? Like Iranians always talk about like passing for Italian. It's
Mhm.
become almost a joke. So, I wanted someone that a character like Roxana who not only does that, but she pulls it off. She pulled it off for many years so that people actually really do believe she's Italian in her school. So much so that it's going to be a scandal if it gets revealed. So I wanted to imagine someone who could actually pull that off. But the funny thing is, like, I think we can Iranians, most Iranians, can pull off being from lots of different regions, mostly European, but like tons of different places, South American cultures,
Yeah.
all the stuff. So we have a little bit of that, but it's done in a different way than say like East Asian populations where they will often Americanize their names, but because they tend to be more of a visible minority, they can only go so far. Iranians get this like weird like luxury in a sense of pulling all this stuff off, but at the same time it's kind of a curse because it's also like I think most Iranians have had this experience where people will think you're something else and
Hmm.
they're really happy about that. And then you say, oh no, I'm Iranian. And you kind of feel like they're disappointed now or
Oh
they're,
God, yes. I've
yeah,
been in that situation so many times.
it's awful. It's such a bad feeling because you're like, it happens to me all the time too. And it's like, oh, like
It's
what's
so strange. It's like I'm the same person that you talked to
right?
a second ago before you found that out. But it's
Exactly.
also like your own character's relationship is so contradictory, like in a good way. I mean, because like let's take Al, for example. Like this is a character who basically tries to pass himself off as white in a way.
Right.
But then he also has this fantasy of having white servants as some kind of
Yeah.
vengeance
Mhm.
status. And that's so interesting. It's like on the one hand, he wants to be white. On the other hand, he wants to have these white servants because he knows deep down he's not. So like, how do you
Yes, I
make
love
sense
that.
of this, right? Like, how do you make sense of this, both for your characters, but for our community? Because I think we're finally starting to have these discussions of our relationship to whiteness and how
Yeah.
can we move forward with a deeper understanding of where we fit?
Well, I think that contradiction, like for writers, we love contradiction. So that was
Yeah.
like a very juicy contradiction for me because it's like not solvable, that dilemma. It's so wild. And again, it's like normalized. People get away with that. There's so many people I know like Al who are like, obviously Iranian-American, but they really lean into the American part. And then, but at the same time, especially if they're around certain company, then they will lean into their Iranianness. Again, there's a privilege for that, right?
Yeah.
Again, privilege of passing kind of stuff. But like Al for me was based in a lot of ways on Bijan because I
Oh,
worked
be
across
down the clothing designer.
yes, the clothing and perfume designer. I was across the street from that was the shop in Rodeo Drive I worked at was across the street from the Bijan store. So I was always confronted with Bijan and his universe. And even before that, the ads I always found to this day, I think there's some of the most amazing ads
Oh,
like Bo Derek with her braids and like they're so brilliant because they're glamorous, but they're also campy, which is
uh-huh.
really the best case scenario for Iranian American representation of that era. Like how genius do you have to be to get the glamour plus the camp, sense
Yeah,
of humor plus the beauty?
yeah,
That's Iranian culture. So
it is.
as much as I
It
had
is.
issues with Bijan, I also kind of admired him in a way, like his gold gun that he did, like all of it is just so he like invented Tarangeles. So I wanted Al to be this huge entrepreneur who gets really rich in LA, but I wanted him to be like modeled on someone who was really like successful in that way. And so for me, like Bijan, like everyone's Iranian. We look at, Bijan RIP, we can see that he's Iranian. Of course he's Iranian. He's a tan Iranian man. But if you see like interviews with him, like even through his accent and stuff, it feels like he doesn't understand that people know he's Iranian. Like he's so LA and so American in a
Right.
way. So I
Right.
was obsessed with that.
No, it's really interesting. And then the way that Al, of course, makes his fortune is in food. And one thing that's interesting, we've now done this is the fourth books, but many books that focus on food. Our last two books, Lion
Oh,
Women, Tehran and Darius the Great is Not Okay, both have such an emphasis on the
right.
cuisine. And you even say it in your book. At one point, you say, wait, where is it? I have to find the quote. Americans seem to forget their racism when their stomachs were calling. I love that.
Yeah.
Because it's so true. Americans are so racist
Right.
when they have to go to the restaurant of the culture that they hate. But what was
Right.
interesting is that whereas these other books really focused on our cuisine and on bringing it to life on the page, you have Al make like the most American thing of all time, this
Yeah.
like hot pocket pizza fusion Cinnabon, like
It's
pizza.
horrible. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
what was the decision there? Like, did you always know I want him to make his fortune in something that is so not Iranian?
Yeah, I wanted him and Roxana to have this real connection. And so the pizza thing was like Pizza Bomb, this is his
Yeah.
invention, was like very tempting because it had that like fake Italian kind of vibe, which
Yes.
meshed with Roxana's obsession with being seen as Italian, but also they're just so American. And I thought with Al, like as an Iranian who came to the US when he did, very tough time, he was probably most anxious about assimilating. you
Hmm.
know, like accent elimination. Like I think people have forgotten there was a time when you would drive around Hollywood and you'd see accent elimination classes, flyers for it everywhere. And they were very much targeted to Iranians, actually. It was like I feel like Iranians ran them sometimes. It was weird. And so like he was very much part of that, like wanting to let go. So I think the last thing he would have done is thought like brought an Iranian product. He would have really wanted it to be an American product. And he probably would have aimed, unlike Bijan, he would have aimed low. Like he wanted something that would just explode in a mass like consumer way rather than a luxury item, you
Yeah.
know? So like, yeah, I mean, like Bijan stuff too is so European, you know, like
Yeah.
it's not Iranian. Only later when you think about it, you're like, oh, it's Iranian-American
Yeah.
actually. And there is something to me very Iranian-American about like this embrace of a certain trashy thing, like just like that kind of junk food to me is like I don't know how to explain it. It just felt right to me that it would be like
Yeah.
what his empire, so something meaningless that his empire would be built on. And that also created a conflict with his wife, who's
Hmm.
always been really trying to still connect with her Iranianness and also always strives to find meaning in things, more like Mina. So like
Yes.
Roxana and him are the disruptors. And then there's like people like Mina and Homa who are trying to ground everything again.
Yes, which is fascinating, and you do it so well. And on Mina, I think what's so interesting, because of course at the party, Mina's the one who has the most successful party, and I think it probably is because she's the one who's willing, she's done that work to be herself more
Yeah.
authentically, and then people respond to that, which is something our community is coming around to understanding, is that people prefer you when you're authentic and not putting
Totally.
on an air of something you're not. Okay,
Exactly.
this is I'm looking at the Q&A, and I will put these in. I of course had questions about the pandemic, but the first question from an anonymous attendee is, you set Tarangeles just before and during the early pandemic period. How did the pandemic context influence the story's arc, the characters' vulnerabilities, and the themes of visibility, fame? And I'll just throw in that if you could tell us a bit about how you did this so close to the pandemic, because the book came out very early in the pandemic. I'd love to.
Yeah,
Well,
well, yeah, I mean, because by the time you write it and then it goes to press, you know, it's very fast. I mean, I sold this book as part of a two-book deal with Brown Album in 2018, and it was a rare situation because like usually you can't sell fiction on proposal, but like this editor had seen my first novel ages ago and wanted to acquire my work for a while. And so he just bought Tarangeles based on 100 pages with Brown Album, and it was a very different book then. It took me years. Like in 2018, when I sold it, I'd already been working on it for like 7 years at that point. But I always had this problem. Like I was always stuck redrafting and redrafting because I couldn't figure out the era. Like that was the part that was the hardest for me. I had the setting as in the location Tarangeles, but I didn't have the time, you know, setting is time and place, right? I had place, but not time. So I couldn't figure that part out, and it didn't feel right to just do it in whatever contemporary, you know, I needed this era to kind of gel
yeah,
everything together. And it wasn't until, you know, I was under all this pressure with my editors, like, when are you turning this in? When are you turning this in? And in 2020, I was in like the heart of the pandemic in Queens where it was like really bad. Like it was the center of like the world's like crises at one point. And I was just stuck at home, and I suddenly thought, what if I did a draft of this that's set in like now in the pandemic? Like, so I tried a draft of it in the first 6 months of the pandemic, which is what ended up being published. And it was perfect because it gave the book this great like pressure cooker feel, like all of these members of this family stuck at home in this mansion together, and they're all their issues are coming up. And then like the super spreader party, you know. So there's so many things that made all of their issues even more messed up. So it was perfect for a novelist. So I just felt like it was like the ideal way to, you know, give the book it was this one missing ingredient that it didn't have. And then once it had that, I felt really good about it. And then that was the draft that everyone agreed was like correct. So, but it was
fast.
really hard to do because like I was telling you, like I had to double check when we were in copy edits, like, did this emoji exist in 2020? Like we were in copy edits in 2024. trying to make sure things were authentic to 2020, just in case somebody noticed, and it was so meticulous, the stuff we double checked, even slang. I had to go back to TikToks that I had saved in 2020 to make sure people were using the same slang, because there are some differences if you look
Right.
at things very closely like that.
That is fascinating. Did putting
Yeah.
the pandemic in then change other elements, or did you find that the general arc of the character stayed the same?
No, it did change some things because it was like Roxana's whole influencer thing. Like the idea of like, look, in 2012, when I was early on working on this, there was
Oh,
no concept of being canceled. Like there is an idea, yes, you could still be canceled then, but the larger discussion around cancel culture
yes.
and someone saying something racist and then being canceled, or like having to do weird apology videos as an influencer, those things didn't exist. And so I have like that was very important to Roxana's narrative, and it was relevant in the pandemic. If you remember, in the pandemic, there were lots of celebrities apologizing all the time,
I do.
you know?
Well, the pandemic brought online culture to everyone. I mean, I
Oh
think
God,
even
yeah.
me, like all of us, like I spent a lot less time online
Oh
because
yeah,
I didn't
exactly.
have to. And then suddenly there you are stuck at
Well,
home.
either you were spending more time online or less, right? Because some people were
Yes.
just glued to their phone, they were doing nothing else. So there
Yes.
were all these like TikTok really flourished in the time of the pandemic. I had to spend hours and hours on TikTok because that was my only, I was already in my 40s then, right? And like, how else am I going to be hanging out with Gen Z people? And most of the characters in this book are Gen Z. So I had to like spend sometimes 8 hours a day on TikTok so I could understand how Gen Zers are talking.
Yeah.
I already have a distance from millennials as a Gen Xer. Now I have to learn Gen Z speak. There's nothing worse than an old person who's like doing a bad job of representing young people. So that was also like a challenge.
Right. Yeah. And then you're there. I also feel like your book, especially the brilliant party scene, which is so wild, it almost like poses it's satirizing not just Tarangeles, but it's satirizing how humans responded to the pandemic
Yeah,
and
yeah.
what we may have gotten wrong about our response. And I am curious for you, like rereading it after more time has passed from the pandemic. I felt a little sadness at how little we've learned as a society from the pandemic. It felt like we had this opportunity to
Right.
perhaps reprioritize. And I'm curious, like, what has your emotional experience been? Like, you obviously really thought deeply about the pandemic writing this. Like,
Yeah.
what do you
Especially
feel
being
you
like,
can learn? What's your reflection with a little time?
yeah, I mean, I feel like as a chronically ill person too, going through the pandemic, it was so harrowing because like I had just gotten over some of the worst of my illnesses, and I was like, oh my God, now this. And like there was a real sense, especially like in New York, that like we all could really die. I mean, I knew 7 people that ended up dying during the pandemic, the early pandemic. And it does feel like we're not done with it yet. I mean, I just got a booster last week. It's still part of the conversation.
Of
I
course.
think it's
Yeah,
very sad that we haven't, I, you would have thought would have been this great opportunity for the world to come.
I know. No, I feel the same. And that's what I said. I often, especially when you look at it through a piece of art like yours, it really makes one feel sad that we haven't learned more lessons and thought about how we could improve
Right.
our futures. But speaking of politics, there's a question here too from an anonymous attendee that says, as an Iranian-American reader, I often feel torn between nostalgia for a homeland I've never known and frustration with the politics attached to it. Did you find yourself navigating that same emotional terrain while writing this novel?
Yeah, of course. That's a great question.
Great
I
question.
think they I mean, the politics that are attached to Iranian culture, especially Iranian-American culture, especially in California, has like always been kind of problematic. So I think a lot of people, when they first heard about this book, were like, "Oh, why do you want to write about this? Like, we already have Shahs of Sunset. Like, we don't need more like negative." I've had a lot of people tell me over the years, even my first book, which was about Iranians that were lower middle class, or if not lower class, like even in that depiction, people were like, why did you portray the dad as so angry? Like that makes Iranians look bad. Iranians are always so worried about this stuff. I get it, like you have a minority culture that's always been marginalized in really kind of harrowing ways. So, yeah, I think this is I think you have to remember that you're just responsible to one story and portraying the thing rather than thinking that you're representing your whole culture. Like I always think of my books as like my body of work, and that if someone were to really understand me as an artist, they would have to read like everything and understand the body of work. I would hate for like Tarangeles, even as much as I appreciate the book, I don't want it to represent the whole of my, I don't want to ever be seen as like the writer of like Tarangelino culture, that's not it at all for me. But it just was one element of the larger story of Iranian Americans that I want to tell because you can't really ignore them either. People are mad at Shahs of Sunset. I know I wrote one of the early essays on Shahs of Sunset in the arts and leisure section of the New York Times in 2012. I even talked about working on Tarangeles in that essay. And in it, I say, like, people are being so judgmental and snobby about this show that they haven't even seen. But it's like, don't be mad at the show. Be mad at the culture that created this show. Because those are real people. We all know people like that. Like if you've
Of
lived,
course.
you know.
I
So
think, yeah, and I think for me personally, I'll say there's like a burden of representation thing where when we don't have a lot of stories about Iranians, the stories we do get are going to have the burden of representing all
yeah,
of us. And the
exactly.
beauty of the fact that we're seeing so many more Iranian writers, filmmakers, artists of all kinds telling their stories is that we now can be much more specific. Like my Iranian experience is very different than yours, is very
Yeah.
different. The last
Right.
three authors we had, there's generational differences, other, intersectional differences, and
Yeah.
that's fascinating. And there's actually there's other questions about this, and they kind of tie in. So I'll just throw them in now. But, there's one that says, how would you like Tarangeles to contribute to conversations about Iranian American identity in literature and popular culture? And another that asks, in what ways you feel compelled to capture the Iranian American experience differently in Tarangeles than what we've seen before?
Yeah, I mean, I felt like before I had the idea, like right around when I was having the idea for Tarangeles, I was just surprised that there wasn't this kind of like messy satire, like very humorous, maybe darkly comic
Mhm.
story of LA Iranians. I was shocked that book didn't exist. And then I realized, well, who am I waiting for to write that book? I would probably be the writer that who would write that book because at that time, there was not as many Iranian American writers, and I was certainly seen as one of the Iranian American writers who was writing a lot of with a lot of humor and a lot of pop cultural references. So I was like, I should be just writing that, I guess. And I thought also like it was my distance from that culture was also important too. Like I wasn't of Tarangeles, but like I'd been in that world in a service form. Like I'd been a shop girl in Tarangeles. So I thought that also would give me a unique perspective because I don't want to write a book that's just celebrating these people without any sort of, cultural critique. But at the same time, like I like that you noticed that there was love in there too, because I also wanted like I didn't want to just make a hateful depiction. I wanted these characters to be complicated and for people to like really look into those complications. And so for something like I want people to read a book like this and to think, why would a lot of these characters be the way they are? Like, why would Homa have this heaviness and depression around her? Why would these daughters want to fake their identities so much? Why would you have someone like Mina who's like struggling so much? I wanted them to I wanted there to be a little bit of a deeper look at this culture rather than just like say the surface stuff you see more of like in Shots of Sunset and stuff like that.
Yes. No,
So
and you captured it. And there is a question here about how satire is a big part of the novel, but so is emotional depth, family drama, identity struggles. So how do you navigate the tension between satire and sincerity?
yeah, well, you know who taught me that really well? Another thing, in addition to the pandemic, that really unlocked this book for me, because sometimes a book is like a puzzle you have to solve, and there's things that come along and they are like the things that unlock it. And so, in addition to pandemic being a setting, the other thing was I started reading Kevin Kwan's Crazy Rich Asians.
So good.
So good. And people don't, I mean, they're massive international hit, but I still think they're underrated for how great they are. Like Kevin Kwan should be seen like our Tolstoy. Like he's really brilliant. Like, and his level of satire is just like his brand of satire is so special. And when I read that trilogy and then saw the movie and everything, I was just like obsessed because I thought I would love an Iranian American version of this. And it's funny, like in like thinking about people like for blurbers, like we got you to blurb, like Kevin and I ended up becoming friends through the blurbing process. And Kevin was like a huge encouragement. And I told him, I said, I'm writing it in my acknowledgments, I'm mentioning it in interviews, I'm telling everybody that it was reading your work that really unlocked how to write this book that's essentially like a Crazy Rich West Asians.
That's
Um, I mean, at
amazing.
one point, I even wanted some of his characters to be like have cameos in this book, and then because we basically are on the same umbrella publisher. They're like, "Oh, you can't just do that. Like, we own the book." So it's like, okay, but I still dream of like there being like, Astrid appearing like in a
Mhm.
scene with like Homa or whatever. But yeah, that those books were huge for me because it's like again satire with a lot of heart, and I think those are the most interesting satires.
Yes, and I do. Okay, there's a few more questions, and I know we're gonna have to go to book club soon, but because you brought up influences and Kevin Kwan, I have to ask. I was obsessed with the James Joyce ending. Upon rereading it, I'm like, how did she even do this? Like a Ulysses homage with like multiple Lana Del Rey references and shit and glitter, and I'm just laughing so hard. But the question I want to ask is, I have now been engaged in so many books by Iranians in the diaspora, and I've noticed we tend to have some of the same influences. And I'm really interested, like, I'm obsessed with Irish authors. I love James Joyce.
Yeah.
I've gone to Dublin and just like followed the path of Joyce. It's funny that you had so many Lana references because I'm obsessed with Lana Del Rey. I notice a lot of the same things, and I'm curious, do you think there's a reason for that? I mean, especially with the Irish, who I've always thought there are some interesting parallels and experience that can be made.
Yeah, there's like a book actually comparing Iranian and Irish culture, and some people argue that in their early tribal roots there might be similarities ethnically or like
Interesting.
blood that may be shared. It's very fascinating. Yeah, I've always loved Irish culture and like Irish activists, Irish artists, everything. Yeah, I think Irish people understand oppression, but they also tend to be very emotional and very open with emotions. So I really connect with that. I hadn't thought about that so specifically. I mean, Joyce is like my real guy in that world, and I always love the modernists. I love anything with stream of consciousness. But for
Uh-huh.
me, even more than the Irish, is Southern writers. And I have read a lot about the Middle Eastern cultures having an obsession with Southern writers, in particular Faulkner. And Faulkner was a big guy for me in my teenage years, and I to the point where I did a whole pilgrimage to like Roanoke and Oxford, Mississippi to retrace his steps. And I met Faulkner's nephew, and I have an essay in Brown Album all about this. So I really have been very drawn to the South, but in the same way that I'm drawn to like my own Iranian culture, like with some skepticism and some caution, like I think like Reconstruction era South to me has a lot in common with like Iran of this era, a lot of reckoning, a lot of like trying
Yeah.
to figure out what went wrong, what were these poisons in the culture that did these horrible things, but at the same time also created amazing libraries. And like there was such rich culture, but also such horrors and such evil
Yes.
and slavery. And like, so like I'm really drawn to that. And like for me, the way Faulkner, I guess it actually is cool. Faulkner and Joyce both are great modernists of an era. And it's like that again, that emotional tenor. Like that's why I wanted that last chapter to be like Joyce's Penelope chapter, where I really wanted like finally Roxana's like blood and guts to be out there for us to really hear her internal thoughts. And I wanted to give her something kind of orchestral and like, and I there was a period where I was actually making it really close to the actual Joyce the Ulysses chapter. And then I sort of let myself go off from that. But I that was important for me. There was even one draft where the whole book was written like that. It was a much more experimental book. But yeah, no, I think you're right though. Iranians definitely Iranian artists gravitate towards certain artists for
For sure.
sure.
It's very interesting. And when you bring up the South, I grew up obsessed with Tennessee Williams,
Oh yeah.
and
Oh
there is something now that I think about it, there's something very Iranian because so many of the plays I
yes.
loved, like Streetcar and Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, they were always about these people who had too much passion for the
Yeah, yeah.
culture they were in. Like the culture is telling you behave, fit in, and you're just,
Right.
no, I'm Maggie the cat. I have things to say,
Totally.
you know?
But that explains like Lana Del Rey too. Like we like maximalist
Oh,
emotion. And then
well, it is, and there actually was an article about how Lana Del Rey is so big worldwide, especially in very old cultures because of this
wow.
speaking. And I know we're going to go to book club soon, but I kind of have to tell this story now. When I was in Dublin, there is Sweeney's Pharmacy, which was written about in Ulysses. It's still open, and this amazing old man has like turned it into this little shop that's like an ode to James Joyce. And you can go in there and he'll play you the songs that, James Joyce writes
Oh,
songs. He knows how to play them and sing them. And they have these
wow.
Ulysses walking tours. And when I was in Dublin, I spent a little bit of every day there. He has James Joyce in Persian. I mean, this man is amazing. Anyway, I was in
Oh,
Dublin. I spent a morning there, and then I'm like, I have to go to the Writers Museum. I
right.
left, and the next morning when I went, I found out that 20 minutes later, Lana Del Rey was there and joined the Ulysses walking tour, signed the guest book with her real name, and then I signed it above her. But I'm like, you got to be kidding. I missed hearing Lana read Ulysses out loud.
Oh my
By
God. I
20
love that
minutes.
she'd be a fan. That's
I mean, it
beautiful.
kind of makes sense, right?
Yes, totally.
Um, I think, let's see. I know there's more, and remember that if you have questions, we also have our book club court portion. Please raise your hand icon. So yeah, why don't we, as you guys come in, we can keep, I'll ask one more question, which is that if you have the opportunity to write a sequel painting a new picture of LA, would you entertain it?
That's so interesting. I have thought of a sequel. I have like a trilogy's worth of or even a TV series worth of ideas. But I don't know if they'll ever see the light of day. I think people don't realize like you can only really do sequels and stuff, especially in this publishing climate, if your book has to be like an international like bestseller like Quebecois. But I have a lot of ideas for what's to come, and a lot of them actually end up being like this. The focus ends up being on the different sisters. Like this book to me sort of becomes like Roxana's story with Mina kind of threatening to take it over at times. But I really have a whole Mina arc which intersects with Violet. There's a whole thing that I want to do with like the WNBA, like the first Iranian WNBA player falling in love with Violet and Mina being like, "What? I'm the queer one. What's going on?" And I had a whole thing with that, and then Homa like joining the cult. There's a lot of stuff.
Winning
Um,
cult. I
yeah.
love it. I love it.
Yeah.
Ali Reza John, you're back.
I'm
Yeah.
back, and I didn't want to stop the conversation, but we have to start our group chat. And Porochista John has offered to stay with us, so I'm going to start inviting people who want to have questions on screen. Just please raise your hand icon, and we will bring you on. Here's one.
Yeah, feel free to raise your hand. I'll also say as the moderator that you can ask questions, but also a book club is a chance to share how the book made you feel. And part of what's been beautiful about these sessions is that people often tell us something the book brought up for them as an Iranian, and we come a little closer to each other as a community that way. So it's a safe space. And as I see raised hands, I will call on you.
But maybe you want to continue some of the Q&A
Sure.
questions while we get
Well,
people.
actually, yeah. Yeah. The one Q&A question I loved because I had a question about the passage that is written in Persian, which was fascinating, and I couldn't read it. My Persian is still like Baba on non-duds that I can
Yeah.
read. But I did put it in Google Translate. Uh,
Yeah.
but Karine Mardorosian wrote, could you speak about the relationship of the Iranian diaspora to Farsi? I ask because 80% of the Armenian diaspora does not speak Armenian, yet have a strong sense of ethnic identity. It feels like the Iranian community is much more invested in language as culture than other diasporas, or is that changing? I
Oh,
think
that's
that's a
interesting.
beautiful question. I think especially in light of the fact that you had multiple pages written in Persian.
Yeah, yeah. It's
Curious.
funny. Like I used to just dread like my dad's kind of like makeshift Sunday school that he would do with me where he would like force me to like brush up on my Farsi. I was like, okay, it's my first language. I already speak it. What's the point of reading and writing in it? But it's very interesting because like I already knew I wanted to be a writer then, but it was very much in English only. And so I felt like these lessons we were doing on the weekends like were so wasted. And now I'm like, oh, I wish I was doing that even more because I can read and write in Farsi, but yeah, it's sometimes it feels like Baba Nanda. It's not as evolved as I want it to be. It's not on the level of my English. And so I really like that section with Homa's like kind of like nature essay section there. I had to really get my dad to even help me because I wanted it to be very real, but I didn't want it to sound like my Persian. I wanted to sound like someone of her generation. And so I
Yes.
wanted some of that antiquated stuff in there. So I had my parents actually help and and then I tweaked it, but it was all like my like story idea or my it was my language. I had my dad kind of like translate it in his version of Persian, which was very different than when I did it myself in Persian. So
Right.
that was important. But I do think, yeah, Iranians are very attached to this is a good question because it does seem like language becomes like our main lifeline. And I think it's even like so many cultures speak Persian. I was just having dinner with a friend of mine who speaks Dari, and that like we can speak to each other. It's like Dari is just like a dialect, really, right? So it's like it is interesting that that becomes this big thing. Yeah, but at the same time, I don't know a single Iranian that feels comfortable with their level of Persian. Like everybody wants to brush up on it even more.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to. I was very pleased. I went to Munich to an international library where they had Persian children's books, and
Wow.
the amazing Iranian woman who translates them gave me two, and she had me read them, and I was shocked that I actually could. I mean, they were children's books. So,
Right.
but it really pleased me and made me want to learn it again. But it's interesting. My cousin works in the visual arts and just got back from Azerbaijan and was talking about how she really feels like we need to unite more across the world with others who speak our language, like really using language as a way to create a bigger canvas of a community. And it was a really interesting discussion because that's not something we talk about a lot within Iranian cultural organizations. We don't tend to consider ourselves one with other Persian speaking people from the larger
So true.
world. So
Yeah,
language as a connector really fascinates me.
me too. I know. It's so precious. I feel like, yeah, I mean, I think that's the American influence, though. Americans speak so few languages.
It is. But then you
Uh,
also think at that same trip where I went to that international library, they brought authors from all over the world. And I met an author from Estonia a country I didn't know much about, who explained to me that in Estonia, really their only culture is the language. And so to them, cultural preservation is language
oh
preservation.
wow.
Because they don't have like us, like music and food and this and that. And
Right.
so language is the culture. And that
Oh,
fascinated me too. But
yeah.
follow up, please come on screen, everyone. We want you to share your feedback. But a follow-up question I have for you that I find very interesting. I will say for myself, like even though I was an English major who always loved reading and writing when we moved to the West, I could not get a good score on the SATs. I had to take the TOEFL because really, like English was not my first language the way it was for others. And yet I make my living writing in English, as do you. I'm curious for you, like as somebody who is not a native born English speaker, do you actually think that's an asset as a writer where approaching the language differently, not as a native, but more as a student helps? Or is it a challenge or both? Like,
Yeah, I think like Nabokov believed that, he believed that like what we call like language writers today, like those are people often that have English as a second language and they become very obsessed with the novelty of the new language and so they can write about it with a lot more, I don't know, like with a he almost implies that like these writers become more like stylists, and I've always been interested in stylists. I always care most about the sentence. I don't care about plot very much.
oh, that's so interesting.
I find plot really annoying. Like that's why I'm sort of like sometimes hate screenwriting, which I just dabble in, not like you, but like I just, do stuff here and there. But it's like I just am like, oh God, plot just feels like to me like building blocks. Like
Hmm.
and I like to just be lost in language usually. And so that really, I remember when I was learning English, I like the sound of English. And I've always been like an auditory learner, not visual.
But
So
it's
for me, the
interesting what you
sound of,
right. But the thing about you language as stylist, like if you're not from the language, you're approaching it more as
yeah,
something you put on, right? Just in all the stuff we were talking about Iranians being Westerners. I mean, in a way, writing in English, what could be more Western than us
yeah,
making our
exactly.
careers? I mean, it's funny that you go to Nabokov or Nabokov, I guess is the right way to say it. And of course, the first thing
Yeah.
I think of is ABBA because I am me. But I often think about ABBA, who I consider perhaps the
Yeah.
greatest musical band of all time. One of their secrets is that they were writing English lyrics, but were not native English speakers. And the lyrics kind of often are strange. The sentences they form are also very odd. And yes, I'm comparing ABBA to Vladimir Nabokov, but
Yeah.
I think that's as it should be. And what's more Tarangeles than that?
Yeah.
But really, I think that that's really fascinating. And I think to be an artist in some ways, you have to be an outsider.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so true.
And what more, what could be more outsider than writing in a language that wasn't the first one you spoke when you were
Yeah,
born?
you can see this and Nabokov's like if you look at his translated work versus his English, you sometimes see this difference. Like he's very well translated, but you see a certain delight in language and sort of games like his famous short story, The Vain Sisters, where there's an acrostic poem at the last paragraph made from every first letter of the last
Mhm.
few sentences. It's incredible. He liked to play games with the English language, and I think you don't see that as much in his Russian stories. So it's like, I don't know. I do think there's something there. Like, I don't think I would have been a writer in Persian. That's kind of the sad truth. I think I would only be a writer in English. If I had lived in Iran, the revolution never happened. I don't think I would have been a writer.
Really? You don't
I
think
don't even think I
in
would have been creative, maybe.
That's very
Because I
interesting.
actually am pretty good at math and science stuff. And I would have probably just been like, that's the easiest road for my family. Well, I don't know. Like, I don't know what would
that
have happened.
that also brings up I'm gonna read I always like pick out my favorite quotes and since we have time, I'm
Yeah.
gonna read this.
Fariba just joined us.
Oh, one just joined. Come on.
You want me to ask my question?
Yeah, absolutely.
Hi. First of all, Porochista, thank you so much for being here. I attended the panel you were on at the LA Times book fair at USC, and I was really excited to have join you today. So let me ask you, first of all, this conversation around the fluency with which you write in English as an Iranian author has as a reader and as an Iranian person who doesn't know how to write as fluently as you do, it's always a fascination for me whenever I read a book that's written by, a non-English speaker. But anyways, I'm curious, who are your, other than James Joyce and the references to the Irish authors, who are your favorite writers, Iranian or otherwise? What do you read? And
Oh,
what would
that's
you recommend to us?
yeah. I mean, the Iranian writers I love were like very much like the classics, like Sadegh Hidayat and Forough Farrokhzad and those great writers of the past. Um, God, in terms of writers of this. Who I would recommend. I mean, I do like a lot of the modernist writers, so of course that includes like writers like Woolf and now I'm blanking on all the great modernists, but definitely a lot of the Southern writers. I also like certain minimalist stylists. Like I like the work of James Salter quite a lot. I've written a Paris Review essay on his work that, I like his again, but he's a stylist though, but he's a minimalist stylist. So I really like that kind of I like these kind of waspy minimalist stylists, like just very strange to me, very other to my existence. And I love that stuff. Oh, I love this one Scandinavian writer, Fleur Jaegi, who writes, more contemporary writer, and her work is incredibly just weird and interesting. I also like some really pop cultural, like writers with more of a pop cultural bent, like almost like what people sometimes consider guilty pleasures, but like, Mona Awad's work, like her book Bunny and Rouge, and she has a new one. I'm about to pick up my copy of her We Love You, Bunny. I think she does a really great job of she's really my kind of like weirdo stylist and full of pop culture in every book.
Can I ask you a follow-up?
Yeah.
When you read Iranian authors such as Sadegh Hidayat or others, do you read them in English translation like I would?
Yeah, usually I only sometimes like I just wrote an intro for a book for a classic of Reza Ghassemi's, Woodwind, Harmony, and Nighttime. And I started looking at some of the Persian, but it was really difficult for me. I mean, he's sort of an experimental writer, so that makes sense. But I was really trying to be ambitious in writing the intro. I wanted to read it all in Persian first. And then I just was like, oh, no, I just have to read the English translation and call it a day. I can't do it on the same level, or it just takes me a really long time.
Yep. Thank you.
I just want to add in here that, as an Iranian-American growing up, I think we're all the same generation, with no books by Iranian-American authors where we can hear our own stories or stories about us, or that stories that we can relate to. It's just so important to see these books, and books like yours, covering all different aspects, all different subjects, especially all the books we featured on Farhang Literature has been so compelling. And I just want to applaud you for writing this book.
Thank you. So kind.
I saw Anusha just come on. Did you want to ask a question? But
I
then
do, yes. I have enjoyed it so very much. I did ask a question earlier, and I'm in the gym, believe it or not, so I will not show you where I am, with apologies, but I'm just hooked on this, and I wanted to mention something, if I may. I came here when I was very young as well, and really lost all that I knew about our language, literature, and I thought I was robbed off of all that I could have learned. Went to high school here, went to university, and so on. But one thing I wanted to mention is then I decided to pick up reading poetry and Iranian philosophy, and being able to recite all the poems and really try to connect to all that there was in my own language, rather than reading it in English, because when I read Rumi in English, just doesn't do it for me. Whereas when I read it in Farsi, it takes me to levels beyond belief. So I wanted to, if I may, just interject that there is something about our language that has kept us all together and draws us back to what we were all about. When you read Shahnameh in Farsi, there's just nothing like it. So I would love to see you have more Persian passages in your book, if you would. If nothing else, it'll make Abdi to go and Google it. And I'm not a writer, but I love reading. I wanted to just mention that it's one of the last dots that connects us so strongly to who we were, what we were, and the storytelling should not be forgotten, perhaps, about our language and the richness of our language.
Yeah, I love that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's true. Yeah, and poetry. I love poetry. Actually, I should mention that I read poetry more than anything. It's a big part of my life. So I do think that's very important to remember.
yeah. Well, speaking of influences, because you said that the book started as
Abdi, I just wanted to mention there's Jenny here too. I don't know if she
Go
has
ahead.
a question.
Yes, go ahead.
Jenny, did you have a question?
I did not, but I'll say hello. Hi. I'm not Iranian, but I grew up with Iranian best friends, and so I have like a great love for the culture and the food and the people and the language. I so wish I could understand more Farsi, but I used to pick up on words that her mom used to say to her, and I would sometimes be able to just respond back, so I know some
Wow.
very polite phrases. But since I'm on screen, one of the things that came up for me, since Abdi June said that we could talk about what feelings came up for us, I'm also Gen X, so I grew up in LA, very much with that like blonde surfer kind of aesthetic around me. And for that reason, I grew up anorexic. And I had like a lot of very visceral reactions to the way that you talked about like body image and food and like I think I want to say that some of the girls were really restrictive in their eating. Some of the sisters were. So I'm curious, like, what your feelings are around that kind of culture, and was it an emotional experience for you to write that?
Yeah, actually 3 out of the 4 daughters have eating disorders in this book, and that was really intentional. They all have different types, like bulimia, anorexia, and like orthorexia. And so I have, like my mother has really struggled with her eating always, and still to this day does in a lot of ways. So that was like something that I just didn't think I could leave out. I know there was like a few readers that were sort of disturbed by the sort of like bulimia like section with Violet, but I really didn't want to sanitize that. I felt like when I was reading stuff in books that talked about eating disorders, sometimes people would like make things really euphemistic, or like they wouldn't want it the really like ugly realities to be in there. And so I just really wanted it to be like raw and in your face. And of course, like a happy ending, like it's a short-lived period for her, unlike Roxana, who kind of deals with it her whole life and doesn't want to be healed from it. So it was like a difficult aspect of it, but I also felt like it was important because like I can't think of a single like Tarangelino Iranian that I've ever knew that didn't talk about diet culture. Like you go to Persian restaurants and they always now tell you like you can order the kebab, the kubide with salad instead of rice now, which I'm just always like, what? Like, but then like exactly what that's about, and you see all the ladies, the size 0 ladies all around you with their salad. So like we did the no carb thing really early on, I feel like. But diet culture is so ingrained in Persian culture. The worst toxic elements of that are there. And it's very comparable to like the Western issues because there's like legitimate concerns too. Like we have a lot of diabetes in our culture too, and also like overeating in a culture that encourages you to overeat and things like that. And so I just really thought it was important to have it in there and to present it in kind of an intense way. So yeah, yeah, it wasn't really my favorite thing to write. I was kind of stressed out by it, but I felt that it was important.
I think that's interesting you say that because I was very stressed out reading it.
Yeah.
So I think like your intention came across
Yeah.
emotionally for me. I don't know if other people would have felt the same if they didn't have the same experiences, but like to your point, my friend that I mentioned, her 90-year-old mom is still on her case about her weight, and we're
Yeah.
well into our Gen X time.
Right.
Oh,
Yeah.
I think it's a huge cultural thing with Iranians. When I used to go back to Iran years ago, I remember going to parties and the first thing everyone talked about is how much weight have you gained or lost? Like, oh,
Oh,
you look
no.
skinnier, oh, you gain weight. And I was like so frustrated. Like, why does that everyone is obsessed with their weight? So,
I know. All people, men, women, old, young, it's like such a big part of
and then
it.
2 minutes later, they force you to eat.
Yeah,
Exactly.
exactly.
Yes, that's the
Contradictions
strange
again.
part. And my Iranian experience is similar, but I do think a lot of it is also because, in my opinion, if I were to analyze it, Iranians feel it is much easier to talk about what is seen versus what is
Oh
unseen.
yeah. Yeah,
And
yeah.
weight is seen, and appearance is seen, and so it's a safe topic. And the minute you move beyond the physical and the appearances, you have to actually deal with the emotional.
So
And
true.
that's very scary to a lot of Iranians because our
Yeah,
emotional life is full of trauma.
it's
And I
true.
think one thing that your book does so well, and it's so beautiful dealing with new Iranian artists, is it's balancing that interplay of like this family that wants to look a certain way and then showing us the brutality of really like bulimia is brutal.
Right.
It's so viscerally breaking the facade of perfection. And so
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
very powerful.
It's so true what you said about the visuals because it is like I think like they think weight is something you can cure.
Yeah.
Just you can get a nose job or anything. Like Iranians really don't believe that there's certain people that just will have larger body types. Like they believe everybody can be like a size 0. You're just not trying hard enough. Like which is a crazy thing to think in this era. Like we know that's not true, but it's like yeah, that this it's something you can change. The
Right.
visuals you can always change. You can pay for a nose job, pay for this, and it's just,
But
yeah,
it's like, but isn't that like the ultimate metaphor for how much we don't want to let go? Because I think
yeah,
because Iranians lost so much in the revolution, in the war that followed, in all the politics that has followed with the regime,
really.
that to control your body is like the most psychologically like normal reaction you could have to a world you can't control. You're like, well, this we can control. This is,
Yeah,
it can
exactly.
take my country away, but I will control this. And I think that it's just fascinating that we're finally at a place in our diaspora where we can be having these discussions.
Yeah.
Because I
That's,
think for a long time, this just wasn't, I mean, eating disorders in the Iranian community was not something I would ever have heard brought up.
no,
When,
exactly. It's like taboo, even though everybody like did it. But like, yeah, it's crazy.
yeah, but you would need to know. But thank you, Jenny. That's great.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Did anyone else have a
No, I
hand?
think that's it.
By the way, if you're hearing like a strange sound, like nole in the background, that whining, I'm not torturing a child in the background. It's my puppy being dramatic because I'm not paying attention. So,
We couldn't hear it, but
okay,
we
good.
saw your puppy earlier. It was cute.
Yeah, he is very cute.
So cute. It's not Patty the cat.
Yeah.
I love Patty the cat. I was
Ah,
going to ask a couple of quick questions since
yes.
nobody has a hand up. One, since we discuss influences, we did not discuss Little Women. And I love in your acknowledgments where you talk about how this started as
Yes.
book you wrote because you hated Little Women and you were going to write about sisters. Has your relationship to Little Women changed now that you wrote this book?
Yeah, once I found out, like once I started researching Little Women more and I found out that Louisa May Alcott didn't really like it either. Like she felt forced to write it. That really made me love the book. Like, it's so funny when intention can change your
Yeah,
interpretation of so many things. So once I felt that, it's really fun. I really recommend for people to reread Little Women with that perspective. Like imagine an author that really doesn't want to write this book. And then it becomes delightful. You find all sorts of things in there that I don't know if they're quite Easter eggs, but you can sense her like you can even sense her like a slight impatience with like Beth, for instance, who's supposed to be this really like lovable, sweet dying thing, but like it just changes how you see the politics of the characters, including like Amy, who's a little bit of a villain. Like you start to like gravitate towards her. So yeah, when I got to that, it really made me like it more. And working on it for this book, like kind of like rereading it for this book really made it more of a delight for me. Because also I have to explain to people, like I was working on this book way before like the Greta Gerwig, like Little Women came out. So this book I'd been writing for so many years. There were all these things that were happening in the culture that were like relevant to this book, but that like I was like, I'm not really influenced by this, but I kind of am, I guess now. It's everything became part of the book. Crazy Rich Asians, Tarangeles, the Kardashians, like everything was just folded. It felt like the whole universe was in this like little novel. So that was also both frustrating and wonderful because I kept having to rewrite it.
yeah.
Um, like I started this when Twitter was new. Then there's suddenly TikTok, so there was like a lot to just,
Yeah.
it was it was actually shockingly difficult to write this book, which feels like a easy read, but was a
No,
lot.
no, no. And for everyone listening, easy reads. Anything. A work of art that feels breezy is so hard to
Yeah,
execute.
so true.
Capturing that tone is
Oh my gosh.
incredibly difficult. Comedy is very hard,
Oh yeah.
as anyone who tries to do it is.
Right.
So the passage I had wanted to read earlier, because you talked about how you think if you stayed in Iran, you wouldn't be a writer. I do want to read, you mentioned Al had done an interview with Voice of America. And part of what he says is, I am not happy for the revolution and the war, but I have to say, in terms of my life, it was a blessing because I am right where I belong. And I hope every Persian can experience that feeling. You know how the Beach Boys said, I wish they could all be California girls. That's how I feel about Persians. I wish they could all be Americans, but they can't. And so hopefully they have pride in me and see that me and my family and our legacy represents them well. I'm fascinated by that. And I just, I'm curious with what you said about how you wouldn't be a writer, and certainly I probably wouldn't be a writer. I don't know if I would be openly gay. I don't know if I would have a husband and kids. I mean, there's so much we don't know what our lives could have been like, and yet to frame it as I'm not happy for the revolution and the war, but it was great for me. It's it's
Well,
terrible.
Al twisted logic with everything, including the wanting the white servants. Like there's like the problem with Al is like there's a level to which you can like agree with him sometimes. When he
Yeah.
says something, you're like, oh yeah, okay. But then you like he's always problematic too. Like he just says the things out loud because his money has like allowed him to be so free. So he has this like twisted logic about things. Like, yeah, the revolution's bad, but like look at me, I succeeded. So like could I really be like upset? Like he doesn't want to sugarcoat anything. He's really raw about stuff. And just even like tapping into that desire to like have like white servants as a kind of like FU to people, you know, like and just seeing that as a
Yeah.
really elite level because he of course knows like white supremacy is real, but it's not in a like woke way, you know.
Yeah.
He's very anti-woke, but he knows that discourse and he has his own spin on things. So I just find him really interesting. Like he when I would write his sections, it was like automatic writing. It felt like his logic would take over and I wouldn't like I would be spun around like what is this? Like I didn't write this. Like I don't even subscribe to this crazy idea. But he just, that's how he is. He's like one of those people who can talk you into anything because it's kind of like bullshit, but also just like compelling bullshit, you
Mhm.
know? And I love that kind of American hustler. We have a lot of those people in every field in the US, you know, before like Kanye's collapse. Like he was kind of one of those people. You'd see interviews with him and he could just like spin you around logically and all sorts of things. Lots of these like weird manosphere influencers are like this too. You know, they're hypnotic for people and really addictive because they just like they can just they're so confident in their own logic and
Yeah.
it's almost mesmerizing, you know.
Yes.
So I love that. I find that really American and I needed Al to be like that.
It is very American because I mean, I always think like the thing that I got most from America is individualism.
Yeah,
Like at our best, Iranians think more communally and
that's true.
collectively,
Yeah.
and America is a place of individualism. It's like one big Ayn Rand country, like where you
Yeah,
just,
that's
like
true.
rise above all collectives, and that's what Al takes. But then that's what's so beautiful when he gets high on
Yeah.
ayahuasca, that what comes back to him is Iran. I love your description of that, that it's not him going to Iran, it's Iran coming to him.
Yeah, right.
Thought that was beautiful. And I suppose that might be a good note to wrap up on this idea that like Iran comes to you. I mean, you wrote a book called Tarangeles that takes place in Los Angeles, but it's a book that brings Iran
Yeah,
to
well, that's true for us. Like, we know that even if we lived in Iran and we were going to be writers, we certainly wouldn't have been writing about Iran in this way,
yeah,
right? Iran would have just been the given. So, like,
yeah.
what would have even been our subject? Like, who knows? Like, so
Well,
it's
we may
almost like,
not have wanted to be writers because we may not have had as much core traumas to
yeah,
expose,
right,
because I think many of us who are doing, not if you're like an entertainer or something, but if you're
right,
writing the kinds of novels we write, which are digging
yeah,
into the experience, I think it's because you feel the world doesn't understand the experience. You're
yeah,
like, well, I have to explain this to people. And so it's
right.
beautiful. Jenny, thank you for being here as a non-Iranian, and any
Yeah,
non-Iranian
that's awesome.
listening. As much as we have to create spaces for our community, we also have to teach people through our art what our hearts and minds or souls are
Yeah.
all about. And that's what we're doing here. So thank you, Abdi Nazemian, for giving us
Yeah,
this
thank
space to do
you.
that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to both of you. What a fabulous conversation this has been. We're really grateful for Porochista John and Abdi John for today's discussion about this brilliantly engaging novel. And again, I thank you for writing this book. It's been
Thank you so
fabulous.
much.
Heartfelt thank you to all of you who joined us in the audience live from across the globe for this fourth episode of Farhang Literature. And special thanks to everyone who participated in the discussion. Please note that today's event was recorded and will be made available on farhang.org. In the coming days, all registered guests will be receiving the viewing link as soon as it is available. As always, we welcome you to visit farhang.org for all of our latest programs, events, and performances. And if you haven't read Tehrangeles already, please pick it up. It is available on all book sites, and we also have it linked on farhang.org.
Yeah, it's in paperback now too.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
As always, we welcome you to visit Farhang.org for all our programs, events, and performances. And until then, we bid you farewell. Be umid didar. Thank you both, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.